I am what I am, moment by moment, like everyone else. It is what it is. As a social species that develops in a nucleus of similar species, it is human nature to delegate others for the provision of some of our needs. Not everyone takes care of their children's education. Not everyone makes their own clothes or spins their own fabrics or provides their own food and water. Delegating is neither wrong nor right. It is what it is. The problem is to balance how much we delegate others and how much we do by ourselves. Because every time we give someone else a responsibility, a need, a pleasure, we also hand over a small piece of our freedom. And whoever takes responsibility for 1, 10, 100, 1,000, million of people wants in exchange an interest of the same value. And after all of my life experience, I believe that this is more than fair. Of course, there are those responsible for millions of people who take advantage of their power, but usually power in every human body is legitimized by the people who express it. From the president of an apartment building to the president of the United States. Every power is the mirror of the socio-geographical situation of the people who live there. There is no other way to explain the persistence of foreign policy or domestic, despite the formal change in regime. A striking example is Russia, where the policies of Gulag, special prisons, and exile in Siberia for political opponents have remained the same since the time of the Tsars, passing through the Soviet era to today Putin's Russia, or the foreign policies on expansionism towards Europe or south towards Asia with the hammering propaganda of being surrounded by enemies. In short, the world seems like shit to us because of all of us. Some more, some less, are basically shit, unconscious. These days, the topic of climate change has been resumed with a great big yay. If only because a new administration has arrived in the US. And all the recipes that every human group expresses to solve the situation, partial recipes, sometimes utopians, sometimes more realistic, but all of them lack a basic ingredient. They do not take into account that the majority of people have no desire to take the slightest responsibility, accustomed for thousands of years to mind their own business and to obey the power without objections. Because it is now clear that in the current situation, the inhabitants of the earth either take a little responsibility to change the predatory trend of energy policies and make a profit now policies, or the result will be the one that the powerful on earth have always adopted, which is to unleash a great big war, reset everything and start over. It would take a leap of conscience of the entire humanity to overturn the dogmas on which our civilization is based, other than no vax marches or protest against the high cost of petrol. Of conscience to belong to the only organism of humanity and understand that fighting each other is senseless and useless. Or even better, to belong to a single organism planet, and that destroying it is dangerous and senseless. And then to belong to a universe in which diversity and disorder generate life and energy. The world is complex because we are the infinite facelets in space and time of the same and only creative force that in this way recognizes itself. This is a fairy tale of Hindu cosmology and I like it very much. There's no need to explain that as a child I have always been fascinated more and more by the physical map of the world, with those vast and boundless areas of mountains, lakes and rivers where you get lost in the fantasy of travel and exploration, while I detested the political ones where artificial borders divide people and imprison them in cages more or less impossible and still difficult to overcome culturally. Now I look at it more carefully because I like to understand where I am and what are the power relations amongst the various rulers of the world. Even if you don't adhere to any conspiracy creed, it is undeniable that there are power groups that share the resources of the planet, quarrel, make wars in various ways to the detriment of the majority of people, and there is no need to be political scientist or anti-capitalist to realize it.
Since the beginning of the world, whoever possesses the best war technology has dominated those who do not have it.
From the time of the men holding a club to today's supercomputers. Now, it's one thing to produce it, another to convince people that it works. How do you do it? Simple. You exacerbate certain diatribe in strategic points of the world, and you provide part of that technology to the belligerents who will act as a showcase for possible buyers. It happens every 6 months in Palestine to sell limited range weapons.
And the defense against them.
It happens in Latin America to refine riot control weapons, or in Kashmir,
or in Caucasus,
and so on.
Yes, but many countries, especially those of the First World, have in their legislation the prohibition of selling weapons to warring nations.
And that's when the mafia gets involved, clandestine, armed wing of all the power groups. That's where the mob comes in. They're in charge of supplying nations or illegal gangs with those precious devices to maintain order or to overturn power. And in exchange for what? Drugs, of course. Just have to notice the biggest producers of drugs are the biggest consumers of weapons, and the biggest producers of weapons are the biggest consumers of drugs. It is what it is. I try to stay clear as possible of any propaganda or any biased supporter in order to understand a political and or social event. It is a difficult job because I am conditioned, like everyone else, by the propaganda of the country where I live or the empire to which I belong, by the prejudice inherent to my culture in spite of myself, although I tend to inform myself from various sources. The only strong identity I have is my belonging to the human race, or better, the sentient beings, as they say in Hindu jargon. On the other hand, what we're witnessing in small and large scale are just games, power games at all levels, perverse games for others less fortunate, games of solidarity or such called for the beautiful souls, and finally games played with conscience in which you risk to have fun. I'm talking about games because any human activity is a game. Who acquires responsibility for hundreds, thousands or millions of people has no qualms about using any means to retain it, legally and illegally, because of the advantages it brings, as well as, of course, those who want to undermine the office and replace the command at all levels, from the relationship between couples to that between the US and China. It is what it is. In this way, it is possible to better understand the existence of wars and guerrilla that by chance break out near mining areas or places of strategic importance, always justified by local problems. Those undeniably exist, but are pumped up to make the poor and blameless pawns fight in the great international chessboard.
or you can better understand why the multinationals of crime, or terrorism exist and are all over the world. Do I exaggerate? I don't think so. Think about your own life, and how much hatred, rhetoric, satisfaction, disappointment you carry inside, maybe for trifles like a noisy neighbor. It is enough to dehumanize him, to make him different from us, to make war on him, especially if someone points out that he is not from our geographical or political parts. And that's it. And the partisan hatred is triggered. How easy it is then to push ordinary people to participate in fierce crusades against someone or something because they are convinced wisely to be right, that the responsibility for their own troubles is the immigrant who takes away your job, the Jew who holds the world's financial fortunes in his hands, the gypsy who kidnaps your children, the foreigner because his nation has wronged its own, and so on. All commonplaces, but they always work. Why? Why is the sweat of the brow, the same sweat of the brow to do the same job worth 10, 100 times more depending on where you do it? Why is the value of a person evaluated differently in different contexts, and does not have an absolute and indispensable value? Why? Because we are shit people, unconscious, or we prefer to delegate to others the reason for our existence, how and when to dress, wash, sleep, what and how much to eat, or what shows to enjoy and what artists appreciate or despise, and so on, not to mention the political positions, or religious. No? Don't you recognize yourselves? And yet I'm sure you have a closet full of outdated clothes. Or you're on a diet, and if there is a good guitarist on the street, not even a glance. If he is on the street, is just a beggar. And to those responsible for millions of lives, it doesn't seem true to be able to take advantage of all these blank mandates. Making the poor fight each other is the most popular sport among the ruling class. Think, reflect, meditate, take charge of your life as much as you can. Make choices against the current and do not give your brain, your limbs to those who promise you well-being, because the well-being of which he speaks will essentially be his. Try to think that the world, your very small and insignificant world, could change only if you realize what game you are playing and maybe decide to change it, or change the rules. All it takes is small groups, and they're already there. They don't make the news. You rarely hear about them because they move on different dimensions from the usual ones. But they are there. To find them, all you need to do is start taking back your own little pieces of responsibility freedom. It is much nicer to play games where sharing, collaboration for a common purpose, and the beauty, the elegance of the created product of any nature, is the goal, the purpose. Games where love is the main value on which to base our existence, to share our wealth, our knowledge, our experiences with others, and forget to weigh the exchange value. To play seriously, but knowing that we are only playing, aware of being within precise rules, but which are valid only for that particular game, and not for other games, not forever. Watching ourselves play, smiling at the character, at the pawn we play, smiling at the situation, whether it be comedy or tragedy, while we observe what is there, what is. You can just choose each day, instant by instant.